They say power is a game of shadows, best played in whispers, behind locked doors. But what happens when the whispers turn to screams, and the shadows bleed into the streets? Tonight, we step off the cobbled roads of Palermo and into the dark heart of Sicily, where blood flows thicker than loyalty, and silence is deadlier than bullets. This is the story of a man who wore the face of a farmer, but ruled like a godfather. A man so feared, even the devil might have crossed the street to avoid him. This is the story of Salvatore Riina. Toto, they called him, but history would remember him by another name, the Beast. I'm Lindsay, and welcome to R.I.P. Corleone. It sounds like a myth, a name draped in fiction, but this town is real. It sits nestled in the hills of central Sicily, hidden behind olive groves and ancient vineyards.
I love olives.
The cobblestones still echo with the footsteps of shepherds and assassins. In 1930, Toto Riina was born here into a life of absolute poverty. If you can imagine, at the time, we've just had the global collapse of the 20s, and landowners and the powers that be are really not feeling very generous. So anyone not born of money is struggling tremendously, and that was certainly true for Toto. His family lived in a one-room home, no running water, barely any food.
Broke.
His father, Giovanni, tried to scrape together a living, sometimes farming, sometimes just scavenging things he could find to sell. One day, he made a mistake that would change everything. When Riina was 13, his father found and tried to dismantle a leftover American bomb from World War II. The trouble was, it was still live, and as he was dismantling it, it exploded, killing Toto's father and Toto's younger brother. From that moment, Toto Riina was forged in grief, hardened by hunger. At the tender age of 13, he became the man of the house. But this house had no doors to opportunity, only violence. Toto assumed the position of the father figure in his home and the breadwinner, again at 13 years old, and worked the land that his family had for a couple of years, but ultimately found that he was not able to provide for his younger brothers and sisters, along with his mother, on the meager wages of a farmer. So in an effort to make more money, he joins the local mafia. This is when Toto is 16 years old.
Why would you do that? Fucked up.
And of course, there wasn't an official ceremony, no rose petals or grand gestures, just a knife, a prayer, and a promise. Loyalty to death. His first known murder came only a couple years later, a petty dispute that ended in blood. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison, though he only served 6. And it's optimistic to imagine that Toto experienced reformation during this time. Unfortunately, when he came out, he was not rehabilitated. He was focused and very well connected. To understand Toto Riina, we need to understand the machine he served and then ultimately ruled. Casa Nostra. This is an expression that means our thing. And it was the expression used for the Italian mafia, the Sicilian mafia more specifically. And they really were more than a crime family. They were operating almost as a parallel state.
Oh, murder, nigga. Oh, murder. Yeah.
A government of shadows. After World War II, Sicily was in absolute chaos. Again, no jobs, no structure, no governing authority. That was worth anything anyway. This was in essence the perfect breeding ground for organized crime. Landowners needed enforcers, politicians needed votes, and the mafia needed both of those. So they stepped in very happily to serve as a liaison of sorts, an intermediary. They acted like mediators, masking as protectors. But really, this was just extortion in a tailored suit. Totorina fell under the wing of Luciano Leggio, a ruthless boss from Corleone. Leggio murdered his own boss, Michael Navarra, in 1958 in a public hit, a savage statement across the land. The Corleonesi weren't just rising, they were declaring public war. With Leggio in hiding, Totorina and Bernardo Provanzio became his lieutenants. Together, they launched an unprecedented campaign to consolidate power. Only, they did things differently than the former boss. They were quiet, efficient, and dreadfully brutal. Totorina preferred to kill preemptively. If you might betray him, you are, in essence, already dead. One chilling trademark, he never ever raised his voice. He whispered orders that echoed like cannon blasts. In one case, a fellow mafioso begged for mercy. Totorina nodded once, and the man was strangled with piano wire. And then came the influx of heroin. The mafia's entry into the international drug trade changed everything. The Corleonesi flooded the United States with heroin using pizza parlors as fronts, and they made billions. But wealth brought tremendous paranoia. Totorina knew greed was a double-edged sword, and so anyone asking any questions was eliminated. Fast forward to the late 1970s, Totorina initiated the Second Mafia War. It wasn't declared in public. There were no rules. It was just mass extermination of people they didn't want to be around anymore. The Palermo families were quite powerful. They were sort of like the old guard mafiosi. Totorina saw them as weak, too close to the politicians, too soft.
We call those bitches.
The Corleonesi struck with surgical violence. Hundreds of bodies dropped in less than 5 years.
Damn.
Totorina turned the mafia inward, encouraging brothers to kill brothers. One famous hit he carried out was on Stefano Bontadi,
What?
the Prince of Palermo. He was gunned down after Easter dinner. And Stefano's allies followed as well. Salvatore Inzarello, Rosario Riccobono, even the heads of families who had kept peace for decades. No one was safe in Sicily. Their corpses vanished or were dissolved in acid. Totorina had a phrase for this: Lupara Bianca, the white shotgun, death without a trace. By 1982, Totorina controlled the commission. This is the mafia's governing body. But that wasn't enough for him. He turned his fury to the Italian state. He ordered the killing of General Carlo Alberto Dalla Cisa, a national hero. He had been appointed to dismantle the mafia, so you can understand why this was a target for Totorina. Even still, Dalla Cisa had only been in Palermo 100 days before Totorina had his car riddled with just as many bullets. Then came the Maxi trial. Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, two courageous judges in Italy, gathered evidence from what's called pentiti. For the first time, the mafia's structure was laid bare in a courtroom, according to these internal informants. Totorina and 474 mafiosi were put on trial. Rina was convicted in absentia. So for those who are unfamiliar with this term, it means he was brought to trial and also convicted, but he was never at the trial. They had gathered evidence over decades of his egregious actions, but couldn't find him to bring him to justice. So while he was considered a convicted killer, he was also free and in hiding. Falcone, the judge, really paid the price for this. In May of 1992, Totorina orchestrated his assassination. And this was an extraordinarily elaborate assassination attempt. Falcone paid the ultimate price by getting on Totorina's bad side. In May of 1992, 10 years after the conviction, Totorina organized his assassination, only this wasn't your run-of-the-mill assassination attempt. This was very elaborate. In it, a massive bomb was planted underneath the highway outside Palermo, ripped Falcone's convoy apart. Just 10 years later, that same courageous Judge Falcone paid the ultimate price. Totorina had ordered his assassination, and not just your garden variety assassination, but one of very elaborate order. He planted a massive bomb under the highway and waited for this judge's convoy of vehicles to come by. 2 months later, the other judge responsible for convicting Totorina was murdered in the same way. His sister, in the car with him during the assassination attempt, still bears the scars to this day and is now a politician. With Italy hearing about their now judges as targets of this kind of unbridled cruelty, the Italians erupted. The killings turned Totorina from a ghost into public enemy number one, and millions took to the streets, chanting against the mafia. The silence was finally broken. Now, January 15th in 1993, after decades underground, Salvatore Riina was arrested. The irony? He had been living comfortably in Palermo, less than a mile from a police station. His hideout had everything: a garden, a television. He went for opulent walks. He was caught not by surveillance, but from a tip within his own ranks. The mafia was fracturing. His paranoia had created enemies everywhere. Even his driver turned pentito, again, turned informant against his boss. Totorina faced multiple life sentences, but prison did nothing to silence him. From behind bars, he continued issuing orders, plotting to bomb art galleries, churches, even stadiums. His logic? If the state used terror, so could he. In a chilling prison recording, Totorina laughs as he describes Falcone's death. Boom! The whole highway came down, he said, chuckling. Well, the clip was leaked, and Italians were horrified. Here was truly a man without any remorse and a lust for blood. In 2017, Totorina died of cancer. He was 87, alone, heavily guarded, and still wildly unrepentant. For Totorino, at his funeral, he was such an outcast that they could not even find a priest to officiate. And today the streets of Corleone are quiet. A museum stands where Totorino once walked, and tourists pose with photos next to anti-mafia murals.
Oh, he's trying to be a target.
But behind closed doors, fear still lingers. The mafia didn't die with Totorina. It evolved. White-collar criminals replaced hitmen. The guns gave way to briefcases. Yet his legacy, the reign of the beast, remains a cautionary tale. A reminder that evil doesn't always snarl. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it claims to be a farmer and plants flowers while planning murders. So if you ever find yourself walking through the hills of Sicily and you hear a whisper that sends chills up your spine, remember,
Grab your crack pipe.
the beast may be gone, but his silence still speaks. I'm Lindsay, and thank you so much for being here with us. This is R.I.P.